Thank you, Dr. Borse, and thank you for having me here. I do want to be sure I do a good job because Dr. Borse, as Vice Chair of the Sable Board of Trustees, only recently stepping down from that position, is only lately removed from being my boss. So it's important for her sake as well as for yours. And what a pleasure it is to speak to you today from a college that has incorporated so well God's creation into the very fabric of your campus. And that fabric of creation's beauty is itself part of a larger fabric of a Christian liberal arts college. Hence the theme of your convocation, deepen the faith, and your expression of intention, we deepen the faith by integrating Christian beliefs and practice into all aspects of our educational experience. That's an admirable aim. But let me start our progress toward it today by asking a very foundational question. Why are there even such things as Christian liberal arts colleges? Why don't we just let the world have its way with everyone in teaching everyone how to do everything that anyone and everyone could ever possibly imagine doing? To explore that question, let me use an example of a field, a professional discipline that I know right well, in fact, that I know intimately, the field of conservation biology. And let me use myself as an example. I did not learn how to be a conservation biologist at a Christian liberal arts college. I could have, but when I entered college, I wasn't much interested in Christian liberal arts because I wasn't a Christian. I wanted to study conservation. And I didn't want to sit around and discuss great books. I wanted to go into the field and have direct contact with big, hairy animals. And it was not until later, when I became a disciple of Jesus Christ, that I realized I was being invited to take part in a much larger and greater vocation than that. A book that's popular today in Christian circles is N.T. Wright's Surprised by Hope. I wonder, if Dr. Wright were here, if he would be surprised to learn that many people don't have the surprise that he writes about because they don't have hope in their lives. In fact, more and more publications in and about conservation biology describe this problem of lack of hope, of hopelessness. And this problem is a growing concern. In 2010, in the pages of Bioscience, one of the world's leading biological journals, two well-known and respected conservationists, Ronald Swisegood and James Shepard, wrote to their fellow conservation biologists addressing this problem in an article called "The Culture of Conservation Biologist. Show Me the Hope." "We contend," they began, "that there is a continuing culture of hopelessness among conservation biologists, one that will affect whom we recruit to the academic halls of conservation science and that will influence our ability to mobilize conservation action among the general public. We explore in our article the repercussions of hopelessness for the field of conservation biology and challenge conservation scientists to better balance realism with hope. People must believe that their actions make a difference. Although others have suggested a need for hope, conservation biologists have not yet found an effective way to address this continuing problem. We advocate for the establishment of professional rituals that force us to regularly confront despair and seek out the positive even when things take a turn for the worse." Now, in their article, Swisegood and Shepard advocate, when they're speaking about professional rituals, open forum hope support groups. I am not making this up. That would be institutionalized into all conservation conference agenda. They advocate special workshops on generating and maintaining hope. They advocate that the editors of conservation journals should include instructions to authors submitting papers to include a section or a final paragraph on hope. You know how a scientific paper is put together? Introduction, study area, methods, results, discussion, hope. It would be a new trend. And they advocate that in pre-conference submission of papers, that the prospective author be presented with a character-limited field, a box, on the conference website where the author must state how his presentation offers hope. And Swisegood and Shepherd suggest calling this the field of hope. I tell you about this problem because Christian faith and the hope that arises from it is the only avenue that can uniquely and definitively address it. And the faith you should be learning to practice here at Gordon College is an essential element of your education that is needed to address it. Now, for all the humor that some of these techniques and the names of them from Swisegood and Shepherd might inspire, I want to first acknowledge that these two biologists are dealing with a very real problem and attempting to do so in a constructive, honest, transparent manner. Now, hope in conservation comes in various forms, and we might refer to the kind of hope that Swisegood and Shepherd are addressing as proximate hope or tactical hope. This is hope at the level of technical expertise and technical management, the hope that given enough expertise and appropriate management, an individual species can be saved, and conservationists should say so. This kind of hope is not unjustified. Sometimes technical expertise and the right tactics solve the problem. My home in northern Michigan is less than an hour from the primary breeding area of one of the world's rarest birds, the Kirtland's warbler. Not actual size. It's really only about the length of my finger. And by the 1960s, the Kirtland's warbler had been reduced to a population of less than 500 individuals. Conservation managers created more jackpine habitat. This bird is sitting in a jackpine. It's an extreme jackpine specialist. They removed cowbirds from the warbler's breeding area because the cowbirds were laying cowbird eggs in the warbler's nest. And as a result of these and other actions, the population is recovering, and it will soon be delisted, endangered no more. Here, for the Kirtland's warbler, there is hope. We should say so, with thanks to conservation science and conservation scientists. But Swisegood and Shepherd did not title their article "The Tactics of Conservation Biologists." They called it rather "The Culture of Conservation Biologists," because they recognize that the problem of hopelessness in conservation runs much deeper. One of the world's most famous conservation biologists, Reed Noss, wrote in that discipline's leading journal, Conservation Biology, that as far as getting on with the work of conservation, hope, in his words, has little to do with it. Hope, said Noss, is an unnecessary distraction. Really? Hope, a distraction? Well, Noss follows his logic to its dismal but inevitable categorical imperative, asserting that for true conservationists, in his words, we do the right thing, regardless of whether we think we might succeed. We keep working because the defense of nature is the right thing to do, however hopeless, futile, and pathetic our efforts may prove. Aren't those inspiring words? Now, this approach may work for some people, soldier on with no real hope of success, but most people do not get out of bed and go to work in the morning believing they can no longer achieve meaningful goals, no matter how high that moral duty may be. And that is why Don Quixote is not the first choice of a role model for most people. For Nos, the problem of hopelessness is very close. It's very personal in his own family. He confesses to a conversation he has with his son, who hadn't paid his dues to the Society for Conservation Biology, because his son told him it didn't make any difference. So, Nos admits, I laid on the guilt trip, explaining why he has a moral duty to support his professional society and contribute to its mission. I reminded him of the more selfish reasons for belonging, especially the enhanced opportunity to establish and maintain professional contacts that might help him find a job down the line. Somewhat shamefully, my son wrote out his check. So this, according to one of conservation's most well-known spokespersons, is what the modern conservation movement boils down to: a burdensome duty performed with sorrow and reluctance for the twin but paltry prizes of fulfilling a moral obligation that will make no difference and getting a job in the field so you can keep working at not making a difference. I want to give you today a different perspective, a perspective that's illustrated in this picture. This is an orangutan orphanage in Indonesia. That might cause you to wonder, why do we have orangutan orphanages? It's because we have orangutan orphans. Between 2,000 and 3,000 of them, as best we can determine, and that's quite a lot considering that there are only 50,000 to 60,000 orangutans in the whole world. In Indonesia, if you have a gun and you can go into the forest and you're a good shot, you find a nursing mother with an infant orangutan, you shoot the mother, she falls out of the tree with the infant clinging to her. If the infant is not killed in the fall, it is then easy to capture, put in a cage, and sell as a pet. And you could make thousands of dollars, possibly more than you can make doing a lot of things in Indonesia for a whole year. This practice is illegal, and many of these orangutans are rescued from this slave trade. But that only solves half the problem. You can't just put the baby orang back in the tree and say, "Good luck, kid." An infant orangutan does not know anything. Like us, they don't live by instinct. They live by learning. So, a young orangutan will normally spend 8 to 9 years with its mother before it leaves for its own life in the forest. A motherless infant orangutan is certain to die. Now, relevant to this, the Bible teaches 5 key ideas, what I would call intellectual pillars of a biblically informed, hope-informed understanding of this creation, through which God can exercise his good authority over us and his world. And these 5 pillars help us understand an important part of our vocation, our relationship to his creation, and the hope in God that is inherent in this work. And I call these ideas pillars because pillars are things that hold other things up. They can bear the weight of big ideas. And even more, they can bear the weight of even bigger things you can do with these ideas. These pillars are moral value, moral response, moral capacity, moral authority, and redemptive hope. And all 5 of these big ideas are in this picture. So who's in this picture? Well, there are 2 5 to 6-year-old female orangutans, Betty with her back to you in the camera, Sirius facing you, spelled like the radio network, and Weewick in the red bandana. Now, we'll come back in a moment to exactly what Weewick, who is the teacher in this class, is doing. But first, we should ask another foundational question. Why spend your time teaching an orangutan? And if there are any disgruntled faculty unhappy with their morning class, don't go there. But in our case, why would you do this? Now, the Bible does not provide an answer because it's a book about environmental ethics. It's a book about God, by God, that we might know, understand, and love God. But interestingly, the very first thing that God reveals is not only something about himself, but something about his world and of the moral value of this world. And so the Bible begins, first book, first chapter, in words very familiar to all of you. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void, and the Spirit of God was moving over the face of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw that it was good. If you keep on reading, you will encounter that 6-word phrase, God saw that it was good, 6 times in the first 25 verses of the first chapter of Genesis. It is a phrase that is applied here to inanimate objects like sun and moon, water, land. It's applied to plants. It's applied to animals, the beast of the field, the fish, the birds of the air, and even the creepy crawlies, the creatures that creep on the surface of the ground. Good, 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 good. God saw that it was good. And we know that this goodness in this context is an intrinsic, not an instrumental goodness, because there are no human beings present at this point to make instrumental use of the creation. And God himself would not do so because he has no instrumental need. He doesn't need anything from his creation. This goodness is an intrinsic goodness, or an intrinsic value, a good of its own, unique to every created thing. And so in the very first verses of its text, the Bible establishes the intrinsic moral value of creation, or as an ethicist would say, creation's moral standing. Now, the fact that something has moral standing, moral value, does not tell us how we ought to treat it. And that is the second big idea, the big idea of moral agency. How are we to respond to the moral value presented to us in God's creation? The Lord God took the man and put him into the Garden of Eden to serve it and to protect it. These are the words of Genesis 2:15. You might be more familiar hearing the last 2 verbs translated till and keep. They are in Hebrew abad and shamar. They are more literally translated. Elsewhere in Scripture where they occur, they usually are translated. Serve and protect. Choose for yourselves this day, Joshua says to the elders of Israel, whom you will abad. But as for me and my house, we will abad the Lord. The Lord bless you and shamar you. The opening words of the great benediction of Numbers 6. The Lord make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. This is the first human vocation. And this is the Bible's prescription for the right response to God's good creation. But prescription is not the same as enablement. To enable human beings to carry out this moral response, God provides them with capacity and with authority. Let us make man in our image, after our likeness. Now, in the ancient world, the idea of an image was not so much that of physical resemblance, but of representation of another by physical presence. So kings would place wooden or stone images of themselves throughout their kingdom, and especially on their borders, to declare, in effect, I may not be present at this moment, but this image declares to you, as you stand here in this place, that you are under my authority, and this is my realm. So God makes human beings to be representations of himself to creation, and the reality of this capacity is remarkably easy to prove. Let's go back to the orangutan orphanage. I said earlier I'd explain what Wewick, Betty, and Sirius are doing here. What is today's lesson? Today's lesson is how to open a termite mound and extract the termites to get something to eat. Good, a valuable vocational skill. Now, these 3 class participants have a lot in common. All 3 are highly intelligent. All 3 are fully engaged in reaching a solution. Nobody is looking at their cell phone in this class. And all 3 are highly motivated. But for all that, there is a monumental difference in their perspectives. Betty and Sirius, for all their intelligence, all their engagement, all their motivation, can never see this problem except from the perspective of an orangutan. Weewick, on the other hand, can choose to be, can make herself what a psychologist would refer to as a reflective interactant. She is here choosing to put herself into the feet, they don't wear shoes, of Betty and Sirius, to see the problem as Betty and Sirius see it. Without this perspective, she could provide to them neither teaching nor care. Think about this. There is only one species on Earth that cares about endangered species. There is only one species on Earth that worries about its effects on other species. There is only one species on Earth that feels itself in some sense responsible for the welfare of lives other than its own. That species is the human species. And this capacity is a manifestation of the image of God in the human being. But Weewick has more than capacity to work with here. She also has authority to express that capacity to Betty and Sirius in her care of them. Let us make man in our image after our likeness, and let them rule. I tell you the truth. My conservationist friends who are not Christians have trouble with this part of Genesis 1:26. That claim to authority, they would say, is the whole problem. That's the human justification for the abuse of nature. You and I can understand where they're coming from. From our study of human history, we associate rulers with abuse, cruelty, and oppression. The very names of some of the more famous ones scream that association at us. Ivan the Terrible, Vlad the Impaler. There's a memorable epithet. And Jesus' own disciples had this same connotation of ruling, which is why 10 of the disciples get very angry when James and John and their mother cook up a scheme to have James and John take the 2 best seats of authority so they can subjugate everybody else. Jesus has to put an end to the conflict and to this bad connotation with his own good teaching. You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great men exercise authority for them. It is not this way among you. But whoever wishes to be great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first among you must be your slave, just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and give his life a ransom for many. And in this statement is not simply the heart of understanding creation care, but the very heart of the gospel itself. Now, the simplest form of logical argument is what we call a tautology, a form of argument in which, if the premises are true, the conclusion must be true by the force of logic alone. And here's an example of the simplest technology I know. Premise 1, A equals B. Premise 2, B equals C. Now we've come to the audience participation part of this talk. Especially knowing I'm at Gordon College, this will not be difficult. Everybody with me. The conclusion is A equals louder C. Very good. I know you're tracking with me. Now, the words that we find in Scripture present us in Jesus and Genesis with a very powerful tautology. Premise 1, in God's creation, humans are rulers of that creation. Premise 2, from the gospel, rulers are to express their authority through service to their subjects. And the inescapable conclusion, humans are to express their authority over creation by their service to it. And suddenly the words of Genesis 2:15 make perfect sense. The Lord God took the man and put him into the Garden of Eden to serve it and to protect it. All four of these great ideas, moral value, moral response, moral capacity, moral authority, are present in this picture, but that's 4 pillars, not 5. The last great idea, perhaps the greatest of all ideas, where we began, is the foundation of redemptive hope. For the anxious longing of creation waits eagerly for the revealing of the sons of God, for the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be set free into the glory of the children of God, for we know that the whole creation groans and suffers the pains of childbirth together until now. Now, Paul, speaking to the Christians in the church at Rome, here identifies that creation shares with us a redemptive hope. Speaking to the Christians in the church at Colossae, he explains the means through which this hope is made accessible to God's creation. By him all things were created, in the heavens and on earth, visible and invisible. All things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. He is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, so that he himself might come to have first place in everything. For it was the Father's good pleasure for all the fullness to dwell in him, and through him to reconcile all things to himself, having made peace through the blood of his cross. Now, you may have noticed in this doxology of praise to Jesus Christ that Paul repeatedly uses the same 2-word phrase, translated in English, all things, because it is always written in Greek, ta panta. And Paul's logic runs this way. First, he says, Jesus Christ created ta panta. And that's not a new idea. See John 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. All things came into being through him. Then Paul says, Jesus as God sustains or holds together the all things he created. And that's not a new idea either. See Psalm 104. Then says Paul, all the things that Jesus Christ created and holds together are the very same all things he reconciles through, in Paul's words, the blood of his cross. And so God has included all of creation in his redemptive plan and purpose, and God is going to have his kingdom, heaven, his space, merge with and occupy our space, which is earth, destroying once and for all every form of idolatry and slavery and corruption that has ever bound us and still binds us today. In another book, The Day the Revolution Began, N.T. Wright says, the Bible offers us a covenant of vocation. And the main task of this covenant is image-bearing, reflecting the Creator's wise stewardship into the world and reflecting the praises of all creation back to its Maker. And this vocation is expressed in the work of conservation biology. We see people in that field who are not hopeless, who are filled with hope, who do their work driven by hope. and they are among some of conservation's greatest scientists. They write in the same journals as Reed Noss. Here's what Simon Stewart, former head of the World Conservation Union's Biodiversity Initiative, 29 other conservation biologists from around the world wrote with him, choosing to publicly self-identify as Christians in this scientific journal. Christians are committed, they said, by their biblical beliefs, not only to the conviction that God himself cares for his universe in a daily and ongoing way, but also that he helps and guides people in their conservation efforts. Every time we celebrate a conservation success story, such as the recovery of the white rhinoceros in southern Africa, we are strengthened in this present hope that God is working with us to redeem his creation. Furthermore, these present successes are a very real foretaste of even greater things to come on that day when God will fully restore all that he has made. That is a theologically astute statement. But this kind of hope is not foreign to conservation. Conservation was birthed in this hope. John Muir was, arguably remains, the greatest conservationist the United States ever produced. And he was not unacquainted with sorrow in his work and his conservation efforts. But Muir never entered into a state of hopelessness. And you can see why every time you read his writings or his speeches. Let me give you an example of one of the latter. His remarks to the Sierra Club, an organization that he founded, telling its members, the battle we have fought and are still fighting for the forest is part of the eternal conflict between right and wrong, and we cannot expect to see the end of it. The smallest forest reserve, said Muir, and the first I ever heard of, was the Garden of Eden. And though its boundaries encompassed only one tree and were drawn by the Lord, yet even so moderate a reserve as this was attacked. And I doubt not, said Muir, if one of our grand trees on the Sierra were reserved as an example and type of all that is most noble and glorious in mountain trees, it would not be long before you would find a lumberman and a lawyer at the foot of it, eagerly proving by every law, terrestrial and celestial, that the tree must come down. So, we must count on watching and striving for these trees, and should always be glad to find anything so surely good and noble to strive for. I want you to notice, particularly in these last words, that Muir is not hopeful because he has any expectation or presumption of success in his effort. He doesn't exhort his audience to practice any professional rituals of hope so they don't get discouraged. He doesn't describe his effort as saving the species. He frames this conflict as a moral endeavor. Part of, he says, an eternal conflict between right and wrong, in other words, between good and evil. But unlike Reed Noss, he does not tell his audience, keep a stiff upper lip, soldier on, keep marching though defeat is certain. He says, rather, that we should all be glad. And why? Not because we are certain of victory, but because the trees themselves represent something so surely good and noble to strive for. Muir did not succeed as a conservationist because he understood or always employed exactly the right scientific tactic for conservation problems. He was not successful because he made conservation tactical. He was successful because he made conservation accessible. Not a technical problem that could only be solved by experts, but a moral endeavor that could be engaged by every person. And that engagement, Muir promised, would fill you with joy, would make you glad that you had something so surely good and noble to strive for. So conservationists, past and present, not only understand tactical hope, they can also, if they wish, participate in a culture of hope, of seeing their work as part of this great moral endeavor, and their optimism based on an ultimate hope of a final redemption and healing of creation. The wolf, said Isaiah, will dwell with the lamb. The leopard will lie down with the young goat, and the calf and the young lion and the fatling together. And a little boy will lead them. They will not hurt or destroy in all my holy mountain, for the earth will be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. In that day, the nations will resort, that is, turn to the root of Jesse, the son of David, who will stand as a signal for the peoples, and his resting place will be glorious. For a disciple of Jesus Christ, hope is present, not as a dreamy, unrealistic expectation of success derived from human effort. That doesn't work, and that is an unnecessary distraction. There is a different, much more accurate way of seeing hope, biblical hope, the assured expectation of a certain future event. Our work in conservation today is a resistance movement. It is a work of determined and principled, stubborn, non-cooperation with evil, no matter how popular or how powerful evil may be at any particular moment, knowing that a day is coming when the evil which oppresses us all will itself be crushed, and creation will be healed. All the harms that we have done to it, harms that we can never fully repair or repay, will be healed. And blessed is the one who finds Jesus Christ, seeing him doing that work in the right way, when the King returns to set things right. These can be called pillars because you can put weight on these ideas. You can act them out by consistently doing three things. You can make an informed study of God's creation, and you're particularly suited in your status here as a student. Your class in biology or in environmental science, whether it's your major or not, could change your life if you attend to its lessons as carefully as Betty and Sirius studied the opening of a termite mound. The second thing you can do is to practice deliberate contact with God's creation. And what a good place this is to do it, with the marsh and the forest right at your door. And finally, you can exercise sacrificial concern, because you possess the resources, the time, the strength, the energy, and even a little money that you can exercise for the good of other creatures. You can learn how to make them a home, here or where you live. You can aid those who are called to that work. You can encourage by words and gifts those who work to bless the life of God's good creation. And these opportunities are all around you. I won't tell you exactly what is the right thing to do. I will tell you that these are three right ways to think about what you do so that you can do the right thing. God's kingdom is coming. It is on the way. His redeemed creation will be a part of that kingdom. Its redemption is part of your vocation. And that redemptive hope lies at the very center of the liberal education in Jesus Christ.